Welcome to True Crime Capital. This week we delve into the chilling world of the top 5 most evil kids in history. Brace yourself for a journey through the darkest depths of human behavior, where innocence is shattered and the unimaginable becomes reality. From acts of unspeakable cruelty to disturbing acts of violence, these young individuals will leave you questioning the very nature of humanity. But beware, for our number 1 pick is so shockingly sinister that it will undoubtedly leave your jaw on the floor. Prepare to be horrified as we uncover the twisted mind of the most evil child ever known who turned into one of the most prolific adult serial killers. So, sit tight and steel your nerves as we unravel the tales of these infamous youngsters who crossed the line into darkness. Number 5, Don Steenkamp, South Africa. Don Steenkamp is the son of Dion Steenkamp and his wife Crystal. He is an older brother to Marthella. In 2012, Don was 15 years and Marthella was 14. On April 6, 2012, 3 lifeless and bloodied bodies were found with multiple bullet wounds on their farm, Nou Hoek, near Griquatown, South Africa. The only surviving member of the family, Don. His account to the police is as follows. He recalls being outside the house in the barn when he heard gunshots. He stayed in the barn until the shots died down, then went into the house to find his father, Dion, and mother Christelle dead. He also saw Marthella, who was still alive. He tried to pick her up, but she died in his arms. When she died, she fell to the ground and grabbed his shirt, causing it to tear. He explained that he then drove to warn the farm workers, and that's when he heard more shots. When exiting the farm, he found the discarded weapons at the farm gate. He picked them up and took them to the police station, where he handed in the weapons and told police there had been a farm attack at the house. Ballistics show that both guns that were handed in were used in the murders, thereby making it impossible for the boy to have heard more shots after he drove off and then found the guns. Evidence suggests Marthella was sexually assaulted 24 hours before her death. Blood splatter analysis does not correlate with Don's version of Marthella grabbing his shirt. Experts also advise that Marthella would in all likelihood have been too weak to tear his shirt just before dying, and that blood splatter and prints found outside the house, in front of the barn, suggest that Marthella received her fatal wounds before she entered the house. It would therefore have been impossible for the boy not to have heard her being attacked from where he was hiding in the barn, as he claims. Another blood-stained shirt was found in one of the rooms. Don admitted that this was his shirt, which he changed before going to the police station because it was covered in blood. Don sent the police on a wild goose chase after claiming that the Steenkamp family members were victims of a farm murder. During his efforts to piece together what really happened to enable him to track down the perpetrators, the investigating officer Colonel Dick DeWall asked the Don, in the presence of his guardian, to explain the scratch marks on his neck. He reported that he had fought with Marthella that afternoon but claimed that he could not remember what the fight was about. All of the contradicting statements to the evidence resulted in Don being arrested and charged with his family members' murders. The motive for the murders is believed that Don sexually assaulted Marthella, that she had threatened to tell or had told her parents, and that he had shot them all to cover this up. The fact that Marthella was involved in a struggle before her death, unlike her parents, supports the theory that the murders had something to do with her sexual assault. The murders were committed when Steenkamp was 15 years and 8 months old, with overwhelming evidence against him at trial. Don was eventually found guilty of all charges against him. He was sentenced by Northern Cape High Court, Judge President Frans Kagomo, to an effective 20 years in prison on charges of murder, sexual assault, and defeating the ends of justice. Essentially, he was sentenced to 60 years, 20 years each, for the murders of Dion Steenkamp, 44, Crystal, 43, and 14-year-old Marthella, 12 years for the sexual assault of Marthella, and 4 years for defeating the ends of justice. Steenkamp spent 3 years in the juvenile section of the Kimberley prison. When he turned 21, he was transferred to the adult section to serve out the rest of his sentence, or until he qualifies for parole. The 27-year-old will be considered eligible for parole after serving a portion of his sentence, on condition that the parole board of the Department of Correctional Services are satisfied that he has been successfully rehabilitated. Number 4, Mary Bell, United Kingdom.
Mary Bell committed 2 dreadful murders, but her case does give us hope that children can change.
She was a baby when William Bell married her mother, and it is unknown if he is her actual biological father. Mary was an unwanted and neglected child. According to her aunt, Isa McCricket, within minutes of Mary's birth, her mother had resented hospital staff attempting to place her daughter in her arms, shouting, "Take the thing away from me," as a baby, toddler, and young child. Mary frequently suffered injuries in household accidents while alone with her mother, which led her family to believe that either her mother was deliberately negligent or intentionally attempting to harm or kill her daughter. Both at home and school, Mary exhibited numerous signs of disturbed and unpredictable behavior, including sudden mood swings and bedwetting. On Saturday, 11th May 1968, a 3-year-old boy was discovered wandering dazed and bleeding in the vicinity of St. Margaret's Road, Scotswood, England. The child later informed police he had been playing with Mary Bell and Norma Bell atop a disused air raid shelter when he had been pushed from the roof to the ground, inflicting a severe laceration to his head. Just to clear the confusion, Norma was the daughter of a next-door neighbor, with whom she had become acquainted in early 1967. Although the girls shared the same surname, they were not related. The boy was unsure of which one of the girls had actually pushed him. The same evening, the parents of 3 small girls contacted the police to complain that both Mary and Norma had attempted to strangle their children as they played in a sandpit. That evening, both girls were interviewed about these incidents. Both girls denied any culpability, claiming they had simply discovered the boy, bleeding heavily from a head wound, after he had fallen. Further questioned about the attempted strangulation of the 3 young girls, Mary denied any knowledge of the incident. However, Norma admitted that Mary had tried to throttle each of the girls, stating, "Mary went to one of the girls and said, 'What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?' Then Mary put both hands around the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she wouldn't. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat, and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up, and Mary did the same thing to her. Police notified the local authority of the incidents and Mary's violent nature, but due to their age, both girls were simply given a warning. No further action was taken. On 25 May 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of a derelict house located at 85 St. Margaret's Road. She is believed to have committed this crime alone. Brown's body was discovered by 3 children at approximately 3:30 p.m. He was lying on his back with his arms stretched above his head. Aside from specks of blood and foam around his mouth, no signs of violence were visible upon his body. A local workman named John Hall soon arrived on the scene. He attempted to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, to no avail. On Mary's 11th birthday, 26th May, she and Norma broke into and vandalized a nursery in nearby Woodland Crescent. The two entered the premises by peeling tiles off the slate roof. They tore books, upturned desks, and smeared ink and poster paints about the property before escaping. The following day, staff discovered the break-in and vandalism and immediately notified the police, who also discovered 4 separate notes that claimed responsibility for Martin Brown's murder. One of these notes stated, "I murder so that I may come back." Another read, "We did murder Martin Brown. Fuck off, you bastard." A third note simply read, "Fuck off, we murder. Watch out, Fanny and faggot." The final note was the most complex, reading, "You are mice, why? Because we murdered Martain Go Brown. You beat look out there are murders about by Fanny and Ald faggot, you screws." The police dismissed this incident as a tasteless and childish prank. 2 days later, on 29th May, shortly before the funeral of Martin Brown, both girls called upon the house of his mother June, asking to see her son. When June Brown replied that they could not see her son because he was deceased, Mary replied, "Oh, I know he's dead. I want to see him in his coffin." On the afternoon of 31st July 1968, a 3-year-old named Brian Howe was last seen by his parents in the street outside his house, playing with one of his siblings, the family dog, as well as Mary Bell and Norma Bell. When he did not return home later that afternoon, concerned relatives and neighbors searched the streets without success. At 11:10 p.m., a search party discovered Brian's body between two large concrete blocks upon the Tin Lizzie. The first policeman to arrive at the scene observed that a deliberate but feeble attempt had been made to conceal the body, which was covered in clumps of grass and weeds. Cyanosis was evident on the child's lips, and several bruises and scratches were evident on his neck. A pair of broken scissors lay close to his feet. The coroner would conclude that Brian had died of strangulation and that he had been deceased for up to 7.5 hours before the discovery of his body. The killer had evidently squeezed Brian's nostrils closed with one hand as he or she had gripped his throat with the other. Numerous puncture wounds had been inflicted on the child's legs before death. Sections of his hair had been cut from his head. His genitals had been partially mutilated, and a crude attempt had been made to carve the initial M into his stomach. Again, remember Mary is 11 years old. The relatively small amount of force used to murder the child led the coroner to conclude the killer was another child. Numerous gray and maroon fibers were discovered on Brian's clothing and shoes. These fibers did not source from any clothing within the Howe household and had been transferred to the child by his killers. On the afternoon of 4th August, the parents of Norma Bell contacted the police, stating their daughter wished to confess what she knew of the death of Brian Howe. DCI Dobson arrived at their home, formally cautioned Norma, then asked what she knew. Norma then informed Dobson that Mary had taken her to a spot on the Tin Lizzie, at which point she had been shown Brian's body. Mary had then demonstrated to her how she had strangled the child. According to Norma, Mary had confessed to her she had enjoyed strangling the child, before describing how she had inflicted the scour marks to his stomach with a razor blade, which had been hidden at the crime scene, and the broken scissors. Norma then led police to the crime scene and revealed the location where the razor blade was hidden. Mary Bell was visited at her home in the early hours of 5th of August. On this occasion, she was notably defensive when confronted with the discrepancies in her previous statement. A forensic examination of clothing owned by both girls revealed the gray fibers discovered upon Brian's body were a precise match to a woolen dress owned by Mary. The maroon fibers upon the child's shoes were a precise match to a skirt owned by Norma. Furthermore, the same gray fibers had also been found on the body of Martin Brown. The trial lasted 9 days. On 17th December, the jury retired to consider their verdict and would deliberate for 3 hours and 25 minutes before reaching their verdict. Mary Bell was cleared of murder, but convicted of the manslaughter of both boys on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Norma Bell was acquitted of all charges. Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Cusack described Bell as a dangerous individual, adding she posed a very grave risk to other children, and that steps must be taken to protect the public from her. She was sentenced to be detained at HM Prison Askham Grange, effectively an indefinite sentence of imprisonment. At the time of Bell's manslaughter convictions, she was aged 11 years and 6 months, making her Britain's youngest female killer. A statistic which remains to the present day. Bell was released from HM Prison Askham Grange in May 1980 at the age of 23, having served almost 11.5 years in custody. She was granted anonymity, including a new name, allowing her to start a new life elsewhere in the country under an assumed identity. Upon her release, a spokesman is quoted as saying, "Bell wishes to be given a second chance to live a normal life." 4 years after her release from custody, on 25 May 1984, Bell gave birth to a daughter. This would prove to be her only child. Her daughter knew nothing of her mother's past until 1998, when reporters discovered Bell's then-current location in a resort town on the Sussex coast, where both had been living for approximately 18 months. This media revelation forced Bell and her 14-year-old daughter to leave their home and be driven to a safe house by undercover officers. Both mother and daughter later relocated to another part of the United Kingdom. Number 3. Amarjit Sada, India. Amarjit Sada was born in 1998 and grew up in Musahari village in Bihar, India. He is known as the world's youngest serial killer, killing 3 children between 2006 and 2007. Life was tough for his family, and things got harder when his baby sister was born. Despite being young, he found comfort in nature, often climbing trees and exploring. In 2006, when he was 8 years old, his aunt Mina came to visit, having found a job in the city, and wanted to leave her 6-month-old son with them for a month while she settled into her new job. After she had departed for the city, Amarjit's mother needed to go to the local market to buy food, leaving him to look after his cousin as well as his younger sister. He started to pinch and slap the baby cousin, who then began to cry, which he seemed to find amusing. For some reason, he then began to raise the bar and put his hands around the baby's throat to stop its breathing. Once again, the infant began to cry as it gasped for air. The child eventually stopped breathing altogether. After killing his cousin, Amarjit buried the baby under grass and returned home. His mother was shocked when he later confessed what he had done to her. While his father physically punished him for the act, they did not involve the police and concocted a story for the aunt. Amarjit's next victim was his 8-month-old sister. Amarjit struggled to understand his relationship with the little girl, while the whole family enjoyed the sight of a new member of the family. 8-year-old Amarjit would sit and stare at the newborn child for hours. Eventually, his lack of connection with his sister resulted in him committing the second murder. One afternoon, Parole, his mother, went for a short nap and instructed Amarjit to look after his sister. However, she realized that she had made a horrible mistake when she woke up and saw the evil grin on the face of her son. She screamed her lungs out after finding the lifeless body of her child. When his parents thrashed him and asked why he killed her, Amarjit only uttered 3 words, "Just like that," and smiled with an evil grin. Even after committing such brutal crimes, his parents failed to heed their neighbor's advice to take him to a police station. Everybody was left stunned when Amarjit asked, "What wrong have I done in killing her?" According to his uncle, some family members were aware of the crimes, but they were considered family matters. In 2007, when he was 9, a neighbor, Chunchun Devi, told police she left her 6-month-old baby in daycare, sleeping. When she returned, Khushbu was missing. Not long after that, Sada faced allegations by those in his community. They knew he had a dark streak and had previously suspected him in the deaths of the other children in his family. The villagers were responsible for calling the police to speak to Sada, but authorities initially didn't believe that such a young child could know anything about a missing baby. Under pressure to tell the truth, Sada's parents eventually allowed their son to speak to the police. At his first interrogation with police, it was reported that Sada asked for a biscuit and that he didn't seem nervous or remorseful. He was also unemotional when telling them about Khushbu's murder. Amarjit admitted to hurting the child. Her name was Khushbu, saying he strangled her and hit her with a brick. He even showed people where he buried her body. The police took him away, but he seemed calm and didn't talk much. The police believed him when he also revealed he'd previously murdered his little sister and cousin. Investigations eventually revealed all the children had been murdered by beating. A psychologist who assessed Sada and diagnosed him with a general psychiatric disorder called him a sadist who derives pleasure from inflicting injuries. Under Indian law, a child cannot be sent to prison. Instead, they can be detained at a children's home until they turn 18. And so, Amarjit went to a special home for kids until he turned 18. Sada was released in 2016 upon his 18th birthday, but nobody knows where he is now. Even though it's now 2024, people still remember Amarjit Sada as the scariest child. He's 26 now, and could be anywhere, hiding from his past. I am really hoping that just like Mary Bell, he managed to turn his life around and is not there terrorizing people. Number 2. Jesse Pomeroy, United States of America. Pomeroy was born on November 29, 1859, in Charlestown, Massachusetts, to Thomas J. Pomeroy and Ruth Ann Snowman. He was the second of 2 children. He is on our list because he is a convicted American murderer and the youngest person in the history of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be convicted of murder in the first degree. On February 21, 1872, a 7-year-old named Tracy Hayden of Chelsea was beaten and left on Powderhorn Hill. On May 20th, an 8-year-old boy, Robert Meyer, was also beaten and left in an abandoned outhouse in Chelsea. On July 22nd, Johnny Balch was discovered tied up and beaten in an abandoned outhouse on Powderhorn Hill. Around August 2, 1872, Ruth Ann Pomeroy and her children moved from their home in Chelsea to Broadway Street in the South Boston area. By this point, Thomas Pomeroy had abandoned his family. A 4th attack against a young child occurred on August 17, 1872. 7-year-old George Pratt was found beaten by local fishermen in South Boston. Barely a month later, on September 11th, another 7-year-old boy, Joseph Kennedy, was assaulted. He was supposedly lured to a vacant boathouse near the South Boston salt marshes. Once there, he was beaten and cut with a pocket knife. 6 days later, on September 17th, railway workers walking along the Hartford and Erie line in South Boston stumbled upon Robert Gould, a 5-year-old boy who had been tied to a telegraph post near the tracks, beaten and slashed by a knife. A while after the last attack, Pomeroy was walking past South Boston's police station and decided to look in the window. Joseph Kennedy, the child who had been assaulted on September 11th, was inside. He spotted Pomeroy looking through the window and pointed him out to the officers as his assailant. Pomeroy was immediately arrested and readily admitted to being the boy torturer. Eventually, the rest of the children who had been assaulted throughout the year all identified Pomeroy as their attacker. On September 23, 1872, Jesse Pomeroy was arraigned and heard in front of juvenile court. The 13-year-old Pomeroy confessed to the attacks, was found guilty, and sentenced to 6 years at the State Reform School for Boys in Westborough, Massachusetts. In February 1874, at the age of 15, Pomeroy was paroled back to his mother and brother in South Boston. His mother ran her own dressmaking shop, and his brother Charles sold newspapers. In March 1874, a 10-year-old girl from South Boston named Katie Curran went missing. On April 22, 1874, the mutilated body of 4-year-old Horace Millen was found on the marsh of Dorchester Bay. Immediately, the police detectives sought out Pomeroy, despite lacking evidence implicating him in the crime. The body of Katie Curran was found later in the basement of Pomeroy's mother's dress shop. Her remains were hastily and carelessly concealed in an ash heap. Pomeroy was pronounced guilty on December 10, 1874, with the jury's recommendation of mercy on account of the prisoner's youth. Pomeroy's attorney, Charles Robinson, filed 2 exceptions which were overruled in February 1875, at which point Pomeroy was sentenced to death by hanging in August 1876. The council took a 3rd vote, anonymously, and Pomeroy's sentence was commuted to life in prison, in solitary confinement. On the evening of September 7, 1876, Pomeroy was transferred from the Suffolk County Jail to the state prison at Charlestown and began his life in solitary. He was 16 years and 9 months old. Pomeroy remained incarcerated at the Charlestown State Prison. In 1929, by this time an elderly man in frail health was transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for the criminally insane, where he died on September 29, 1932, at the age of 73. Number 1. Edmund Kemper, United States of America. Brace yourself for this one. It is not for the faint heart.
His mother would lock him in the basement room at night because she had this idea that he could possibly sexually assault his sisters.
Edmund Emil Kemper III was born on December 18, 1948 in Burbank, California. He was in the middle of 3 children and only son born to Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper, Edmund Emil Kemper Jr. Weighing 13 pounds. As a newborn, Kemper was a head taller than his peers by the age of 4. Early on, he exhibited antisocial behavior such as cruelty to animals. At the age of 10, he buried a pet cat alive, then dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. Kemper later stated that he derived pleasure from successfully lying to his family about killing the cat. At the age of 13, he killed another family cat when he perceived it to be favoring his younger sister, Allen Lee Kemper, over him. He kept pieces of it in his closet until his mother found them. Edmund had a close relationship with his father and was notably devastated when his parents separated in 1957 and divorced in 1961. He was sent to live with his mother, Clarnell, in Helena, Montana. Kemper had a severely dysfunctional relationship with his mother, a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who frequently belittled, humiliated, and abused him. At the age of 14, Edmund ran away from home in an attempt to reconcile with his father in Van Nuys, California. Once there, Kemper learned that his father had remarried and now had a stepson. Edmund stayed with his father for a short while until the elder Kemper sent him to live with his paternal grandparents, who lived on a ranch in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada on Road 224, about 2 miles west of the town of North Fork. Kemper hated living in North Fork. He described his grandfather as senile and said that his grandmother was constantly emasculating him and his grandfather. On August 27, 1964, at the age of 15, Edmund was sitting at the kitchen table with his grandmother, Maud Matilda Kemper, when they argued. Enraged, Kemper stormed off and retrieved a rifle that his grandfather had given him for hunting. He then re-entered the kitchen and fatally shot her in the head before firing twice more into her back. His grandmother's last words reportedly were, "Oh, you'd better not be shooting the birds again." When Edmund's grandfather, Edmund Emil Kemper Sr., returned from grocery shopping, Edmund went outside and fatally shot him in the driveway next to his car. He was unsure of what to do next, so he phoned his mother, who told him to contact the local police. Edmund did so and waited to be taken into custody. After his arrest, Edmund said that he just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma, and testified that he killed his grandfather, so he would not have to find out that his wife was dead because he would be angry with Edmund for what he'd done. Psychiatrist Donald Lund, who interviewed Edmund, wrote, "In his way, he had avenged the rejection of both his father and his mother. Kemper's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility in San Luis Obispo County that houses mentally ill convicts. On December 18, 1969, his 21st birthday, Kemper was released on parole from Atascadero. While staying with his mother, Edmund attended community college in accordance with his parole requirements and had hoped to become a police officer, though he was rejected because of his size. At the time of his release from Atascadero, Kemper stood 6 feet 9 inches, 2.6 meters tall, which led to his nickname. Big Ed Edmund worked a series of menial jobs before gaining employment with the State of California Division of Highways. When he had saved enough money, Kemper moved out to live with a friend in Alameda. The same year that he began working for the Highway Division, Edmund was hit by a car while riding a motorcycle that he had recently purchased. His arm was badly injured in the crash, and he received a $15,000, equivalent to $100,000 in 2024, settlement in the civil suit he filed against the car's driver. As he was driving around in the 1969 Ford Galaxy he bought with part of his settlement money, he noticed a large number of young women hitchhiking and began storing plastic bags, knives, blankets, and handcuffs in his car. He first picked up young women hitchhiking and then peacefully let them go. This was before he felt homicidal sexual urges, which he called his little zapples, and which he would later begin to act on. At times, he blamed the women he killed for hitchhiking, which he said was flaunting in my face the fact that they could do any damn thing they wanted, and that society is as screwed up as it is. Between May 1972 and April 1973, Kemper killed 8 people. He would pick up female students who were hitchhiking and take them to isolated areas where he would shoot, stab, smother, or strangle them. He would then take their bodies back to his home, where he decapitated them, performed irrumatio on their severed heads, had sexual intercourse with their corpses, and then dismembered them. The following are his victims: Mary Ann Pesce and Anita Lucchesa, 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students from Fresno State University were lured with the pretense of taking them to Stanford University. After driving for an hour, he managed to reach a secluded wooded area near Alameda, with which he was familiar from his work at the highway department. Without alerting his passengers that he had changed directions from where they wanted to go, he handcuffed Pesce and locked Lucchesa in the trunk, then stabbed and strangled Pesce to death, subsequently killing Lucchesa in a similar manner, Ikoku. A 15-year-old dance student had decided to hitchhike to a dance class after missing her bus. He again drove her to a remote area. He proceeded to choke her unconscious.
The child will pursue these violent fantasies, and in adolescence, the sexual element will come on board, and they will have sexual fantasies that develop along the lines of using people as an object rather than a partner. They want to do something to somebody, not with somebody.
Cindy Shaw. On January 7, 1973, Edmund, who had moved back in with his mother, was driving around the Cabrillo College campus when he picked up 18-year-old student Cynthia Ann Cindy Shaw. He drove to a wooded area and fatally shot her with a .22 caliber pistol.
With most of them, he would actually have intercourse with the dead woman. He would have sex with her entire body, then sometimes also with the decapitated body. And then sometimes he would have oral sex with a decapitated head.
Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu. On February 5, 1973, students had been advised to accept rides only from cars with university stickers on them. Edmund was able to obtain a sticker, as his mother worked at UCSC. He separately encountered 23-year-old Rosalind Heather Thorpe and then 20-year-old Allison Liu on the UCSC campus. Shortly thereafter, Kemper slowed his vehicle. He shot Thorpe in the head with a .22 pistol. He then turned toward Liu as she cowered and squirmed in the back seat of his car. His first 2 shots missed the terrified girl, although his third bullet hit her in the temple. Next, what he does to his mother will make you sick to your stomach. Clarnell, Kemper, Strandberg, and Sally Hallett. On April 20th, 1973, Edmund was awakened by his mother, Clarnell Strandberg, coming home from a party. While sitting in her bed reading a book, she noticed Edmund enter her room and said to him, "I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now?" Edmund replied, "No, good night." He waited for her to fall asleep, then he snuck back into her room to bludgeon her with a claw hammer and slit her throat with a penknife. Edmund then beheaded her and humiliated her corpse, as stated in a 1984 interview. Kemper stated that he put her head on a shelf and screamed at it for an hour, threw darts at it, and, ultimately, smashed her face. He also cut out her tongue and larynx and put them in the garbage disposal. However, the garbage disposal could not break down the tough vocal cords and ejected the tissue back into the sink. That seemed appropriate, as much as she'd bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years, Edmund later said. Edmund hid his mother's corpse in a closet and went to drink at a nearby bar. Upon his return, he invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor, Sally Hallett, over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. When Hallett arrived, Edmund strangled her to death. He subsequently put Hallett's corpse in a closet, obscured any outward signs of a disturbance, and left a note to the police. It read, 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer any more at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep, the way I wanted it. Not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do. Afterward, Edmund fled the scene. He drove non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado, after not hearing any news on the radio about the murders of his mother and Hallett. When he arrived in Pueblo, he found a phone booth and called the police. He confessed to the murders of his mother and Hallett, but the police did not take his call seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, Edmund called again, asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He confessed to that officer of killing his mother and Hallett, then waited for the police to arrive and take him into custody. Upon his capture, Edmund also confessed to the murders of the 6 students. On November 8, 1973, the 6-man, 6-woman jury deliberated for 5 hours before declaring Edmund sane and guilty on all counts. He asked for the death penalty, requesting death by torture. However, with a moratorium placed on capital punishment by the Supreme Court of California, he instead received 7 years to life for each count, with these terms to be served concurrently. Edmund was first eligible for parole in 1979. He was denied parole that year, as well as at parole hearings in 1980, 1981, and 1982. He subsequently waived his right to a hearing in 1985. He was denied parole in 1988. He was denied parole again in 1991 and 1994. He then waived his right to a hearing in 1997 and 2002. He attended the next hearing in 2007, where he was again denied parole. Kemper waived his right to a hearing again in 2012. He was denied parole in 2017 and is next eligible for parole in 2024. He will be turning 76 years old. It's crazy that he is still alive, hey? As we conclude, during our brainstorming session, we had quite a lengthy discussion about who deserves the #1 sport, specifically between Amarjit Sada and Edmund Kemper. Taking into account that Amarjit was just 8 years old when he committed his first murder and Edmund was 15, both killed family members without an inch of remorse. But what sets them apart is that, after their first incarceration, there appears to be no further information on Amarjit to determine if he turned his life around. but there is clear evidence that Edmund went rogue and transformed into an adult serial killer. So, who do you believe deserves the #1 spot? Do you agree with our pick, or do you hold a different view altogether? Also, let us know if you would like part 2 of the most evil kids in history, because we barely scratched the surface. We haven't mentioned Lionel Tate, Josh Phillips, John Venables, and Robert Thompson, and many others from across the world. Looking forward to your feedback. Thank you for watching TCC. Stay safe out there.